Let's get one thing straight from the start. You don't have to tolerate anyone's toxic behavior just because you were taught to be polite. You don't need to smile when someone disrespects you. You don't owe anyone access to your life if their presence drains you. High-value women know this. They live it, they breathe it, and they don't negotiate with toxicity. Now you might ask, what does it mean to be a high-value woman? It's not about your job title, your money, your education, or how many languages you speak. That's all great, but it's not the foundation. High value is about how you carry yourself. It's about the boundaries you uphold. It's about the standards you refuse to lower. It's about how you show up for yourself, especially when things get tough. Toxic people feed on emotional chaos. They thrive on guilt, manipulation, and control. They count on you being unsure of yourself. They expect you to give in because you want to keep the peace. And too often, you do. You second-guess yourself. You make excuses for them. You think maybe if you're more understanding, they'll change. Stop. You're not their rehab center. You're not their therapist. You are not here to carry the emotional weight of grown adults who refuse to be accountable for their behavior. High-value women handle toxic people with clarity and calm. They don't argue. They don't scream. They don't beg. They see the manipulation for what it is and respond with surgical precision. They don't explain boundaries. They enforce them. See, toxic people are masterful at turning your kindness into a weakness. They test you. They push just a little to see how much you'll tolerate. And when you don't push back, they take a step further. It's slow, it's subtle, sometimes it even looks like love, but it's not. It's control. And if you're not self-aware, you'll find yourself in a relationship, a friendship, or a job where your light gets dimmed every single day. And you won't even realize it's happening until you've lost yourself. So how do high-value women protect their peace? First, they trust their instincts. If something feels off, it is. That voice in your gut, it's ancient. It's primal. It's there to protect you. Stop overriding it with logic. Stop rationalizing away your discomfort. Toxic people will always give you a reason to stay, but your body already gave you a reason to leave. Listen to it. Second, they stop chasing closure. You don't need an apology to move on. You don't need someone to admit they were wrong. Some people will twist the truth until they believe it. Some will rewrite history to make themselves the victim. Let them. Their lies don't deserve your energy. You don't need to win the argument. You need to win your peace. High-value women don't get stuck in emotional entanglements. You know the type, where you keep rehashing the same fight, having the same conversation, hoping this time it will be different. It won't. You're talking to a wall. Toxic people don't want resolution. They want control. And as long as you're reacting, they have it. So stop reacting, start responding. Responding is deliberate. It's measured. It's powerful. It says, I see you. I understand exactly what you're trying to do, and I'm not playing. That's power. That's strength. That's high value. And let's talk about guilt, because that's the #1 weapon toxic people use to keep you in their orbit. You're being selfish. You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. Sound familiar? That's not feedback. That's gaslighting. And it works when you're unsure of yourself, when you doubt your right to take up space. But high-value women don't feel guilty for protecting their peace. They don't apologize for saying no. They don't shrink to make others comfortable. They understand that preserving their well-being isn't cruelty. It's necessity. Let me tell you something important. Kindness without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. Compassion without discernment becomes a trap. You can be a good person with a kind heart and still say, this behavior is not acceptable here. That's not being mean. That's being clear. Clarity is love. Clarity is power. And high-value women are crystal clear about what they will and won't allow. They don't wait until the damage is done to speak up. They address things early. They name the disrespect when it happens. Not to fight, but to assert. There's a difference. Asserting yourself doesn't mean being aggressive. It means being firm, being grounded, standing in your truth without needing to shout it. That energy, it's magnetic. It commands respect without demanding it. Now here's another truth. Not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone gets to know your heart, your plans, your struggles. High-value women are selective. They vet people. They watch actions, not words. Because talk is cheap, but patterns are gold. Toxic people are predictable if you're paying attention. They talk about others behind their backs. They deflect blame. They play the victim. They never apologize sincerely, and they always come with drama. High-value women don't internalize this behavior. They observe it. And then they act accordingly. Some people will be offended when you start protecting your peace. Let them. Some will call you difficult when you stop being a doormat. Let them. Some will paint you as the villain when you step out of the role they cast you in. Let them. You don't owe anyone an explanation for evolving. Growth offends those committed to stagnation. Don't dim your light to comfort their darkness. This isn't about revenge. It's not about being cold. It's about being wise. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to lower your standards just to be liked or accepted. High-value women don't seek validation from people who don't value them. They don't beg for crumbs from people who never saw their full worth to begin with. They move with quiet confidence, with grace, with power. You want to know how they do it? They do the inner work. They sit with their pain, they examine their patterns, they break cycles. They heal their wounds so they don't bleed on people who didn't cut them. They don't pretend to be perfect, but they strive to be whole. And that's key, wholeness. Because when you're whole, you don't tolerate half-love. You don't accept disrespect disguised as passion. You don't stay where you're not cherished. You don't chase anyone. You don't lose yourself trying to save someone else. You already know your peace is too expensive to bargain with. Don't let loneliness make you settle. Don't let fear keep you stuck. Don't confuse chemistry with compatibility. Some people feel familiar because they trigger your wounds, not because they're meant for your life. A high-value woman doesn't entertain people who bring chaos to her door. She closes it, locks it, walks away without a second glance. Let me be real with you. Cutting off toxic people doesn't make you cold. It makes you conscious. Doesn't mean you don't care. It means you finally care about yourself more. And that's not selfish. That's survival. This world will try to convince you that being accommodating is noble, that saying yes all the time makes you good. But compliance isn't character. Being agreeable isn't a virtue if it costs you your voice. High-value women aren't afraid to ruffle feathers. They're not here to be liked by everyone. They're here to live in alignment with who they are. So if someone is draining you, belittling you, constantly pulling you into chaos, cut the cord. Stop trying to fix what's not yours to fix. Let people sit in the mess they created. You're not responsible for cleaning it up. Your energy is currency. Spend it wisely. Don't invest in people who withdraw more than they deposit. Don't loan your time to those who keep defaulting on their emotional debt. This is your life, your mind, your spirit. Protect it like it's sacred, because it is. High-value women don't have time to babysit egos. They don't get pulled into petty games. They don't waste energy trying to prove themselves to people who are committed to misunderstanding them. They stay in their lane. They rise above. They don't engage in low-level nonsense, and when they walk away, they don't make a scene. They don't slam doors. They simply stop showing up. They disappear with grace. They reclaim their power in silence. And that silence, it speaks louder than any argument ever could. Listen, you don't have to fight every battle. You just have to know which ones are worth your peace. Most aren't. Most are distractions. High-value women don't let their emotions drive the car. They let their wisdom take the wheel. But don't get it twisted, they feel everything. They just don't act on impulse. They sit with their feelings, they process, and then they choose the response that honors their integrity. That's emotional mastery. That's what strength looks like. And they don't isolate themselves either. They build a circle of strong, supportive, honest people who hold them accountable, who challenge them to grow, who love them without agenda because they know they don't have to do life alone. But they'll walk alone if they must. That's what makes them powerful, that's what makes them magnetic, not their looks, not their charm, but their ability to stand in the truth of who they are, unshaken, unapologetic, and fully awake. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to prove your worth to people who don't see it. You don't have to keep explaining your boundaries to people committed to crossing them. You just have to remember who you are and act like it. So the next time someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. The next time someone disrespects you, correct them or cut them off. The next time you feel your peace slipping, pause, breathe. Take your power back. High-value women don't just talk about boundaries, they live by them. And when it comes to dealing with toxic people, that isn't just a preference, it's a survival skill. They understand that boundaries aren't walls meant to shut the world out. They're filters, meant to protect what matters. And the first thing that matters is self-respect. You can't expect anyone else to honor you if you're constantly compromising your own standard. That's why high-value women don't wait until they're exhausted or broken to draw the line. They set the tone from the beginning. They don't tolerate disrespect just because it's subtle. They don't excuse bad behavior just because it's dressed up in charm. They see through the performance and act accordingly. Toxic people will test you. They'll push a little here, manipulate a little there, just to see what they can get away with. If you let it slide once, they'll try again. And each time you stay silent, each time you rationalize, you send a message. I don't trust myself enough to stand up for myself. High-value women send a different message. I see what you're doing, and I'm not afraid to walk away. They don't engage in emotional gymnastics to keep a relationship going. They don't over-explain. They don't argue to prove a point. They act. They say no when they mean no. They don't overcommit out of guilt. They don't abandon their priorities to make someone else feel better about themselves. And they don't mistake politeness for weakness. They know you can be kind and still be firm. You can be warm and still say, that doesn't work for me. High-value women make decisions based on their values, not on the fear of how others will perceive them. They know that when you allow someone to cross a boundary once, they'll expect to do it again. That's how toxicity grows. In the space between what you feel and so they don't allow disrespect to linger. They name it, address it, and if necessary, remove themselves entirely. And here's the part most people struggle with. They don't feel guilty about it. Toxic people will weaponize guilt to manipulate you into staying silent, into backing down, into betraying yourself. They'll say you're too sensitive, that you're overreacting, that you're the problem. But high-value women see through the tactics. They don't internalize the guilt trip. They don't carry shame for having boundaries. They've done the work to know the difference between being selfish and being self-respecting, and they choose the latter every time. They also understand the cost of not enforcing those boundaries. It's not just emotional exhaustion, it's self-erosion. Every time you let someone disrespect you, you chip away at your self-worth. Every time you stay silent to keep the peace, you create war within yourself. High-value women aren't afraid of conflict if it means preserving their integrity. They're not afraid to walk away from a relationship, a job, or even a family member if it means choosing peace over dysfunction. They don't need validation for their decisions. They don't second-guess themselves because someone else disagrees. They know what they stand for, they're rooted, and from that place of groundedness they operate with strength and grace. They don't create drama, but they don't tolerate it either. They don't seek revenge, but they don't stick around hoping someone will change. They walk away quietly, firmly, and completely when necessary. And when they set a boundary, it's not up for debate. They don't keep renegotiating just to appease others. They don't explain it 15 times. They say it once, with clarity, and then they hold the line. If someone continues to push, they let the consequence speak for itself. Because they don't just talk boundaries, they enforce them. What makes them high value is not perfection, it's consistency. They show up for themselves even when it's uncomfortable. They make hard decisions when it would be easier to avoid the confrontation, and they trust themselves enough to walk away from anything that doesn't align with their truth. Not because they're cold, not because they don't care, but because they care too much about protecting their peace, their energy, and their future to waste it on people who bring nothing but chaos. They know that setting a boundary doesn't make you harsh, it makes you honest. And that kind of honesty is rare, it's powerful, it commands respect. Not from everyone, but from the right ones. And that's all that matters. Emotional intelligence and self-awareness are what separate high-value women from the rest. They don't just react to life, they respond to it. There's a difference. Reaction is impulsive, automatic, driven by emotion and ego. Response is intentional, grounded, led by clarity and composure. That doesn't mean they don't feel deeply. It means they don't let their emotions run the show. They pause, they process, and then they choose the response that reflects their values, not their wounds. High-value women know their triggers. They know what gets under their skin, and instead of ignoring it or projecting it onto others, they explore it. They ask, why did that bother me? What am I actually feeling right now? Is this about the situation, or is it about something deeper? That level of self-awareness gives them power. It creates space between the emotion and the action, and in that space is where wisdom lives. That's where emotional maturity is born, not in suppression, but in examination. They've done the inner work to understand themselves. They know their patterns. They don't repeat cycles blindly, hoping for different results. They look at the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. They take accountability for their role in situations, not because they enjoy blame, but because they understand growth requires responsibility. And that's something toxic people can't do. That's what makes them so draining. They deflect, they deny, they manipulate. But high-value women don't play that game. They see it for what it is. They don't try to fix it. They disengage. Because they know the difference between someone who's struggling and someone who's toxic. One needs compassion, the other needs distance. They don't confuse emotional chaos with connection. Just because someone makes your heart race doesn't mean they're good for you. High-value women don't chase intensity, they value consistency. They don't romanticize dysfunction or mistake drama for passion. They understand that peace isn't boring, it's healthy. And when you're used to chaos, calm can feel unfamiliar. But they've trained themselves to choose calm anyway. They've taught themselves that stability isn't a threat, it's a gift. And they don't sabotage it when it shows up. They know how to regulate their emotions. That doesn't mean they suppress them. It means they feel them without letting them control their behavior. They allow space for sadness, for anger, for disappointment, but they don't let those feelings justify poor decisions. Emotional intelligence means recognizing that just because you feel something doesn't mean it's true. Just because you're triggered doesn't mean someone else is at fault. High-value women take a breath before they act. They ask themselves, is this reaction aligned with who I want to be? That level of discipline doesn't come overnight. It's built through reflection, humility, and practice. But once it's there, it becomes a superpower. And they use that superpower to protect their energy. They don't get baited into arguments that go nowhere. They don't respond to every provocation. They don't try to prove their worth to people committed to misunderstanding them. They've learned that not every comment needs a response. Not every insult needs a defense. Sometimes the strongest move is silence. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Not to be passive, but to stay in control of your own emotional state. Self-awareness also means they know when they're slipping, when they're tired, when they're falling into old habits. They check in with themselves. They ask, am I showing up as my highest self right now, or am I reacting from fear, insecurity, or ego? That kind of internal honesty is rare, but it's what keeps them aligned. They don't just blame the outside world for how they feel. They know that how they respond to life is their responsibility. They also know when to ask for help. Emotional intelligence doesn't mean doing everything alone. It means having the humility to say, I need support. It means surrounding yourself with people who challenge you to grow, who won't just co-sign your excuses. High-value women choose their inner circle carefully. They don't let just anyone into their emotional space because they've worked too hard to get where they are, and they're not going to let someone else's unhealed trauma pull them backward. They don't chase chaos, and they don't confuse it with love. They don't stay in environments that constantly trigger survival mode. They choose peace, stability, and clarity, not because it's easy, but because it's aligned with their self-worth. And when they find themselves in emotionally charged situations, they don't lose themselves in it. They stay grounded, they stay centered, they remember who they are, and from that place, they respond, not react. That's how they keep their power. That's how they navigate life without being controlled by it. And that's what makes them high value. Not just what they do, but how they manage who they are, moment by moment, choice by choice. High-value women don't live their lives chasing approval. They don't shape-shift to fit into rooms that were never built for them. They don't silence themselves to keep the peace, if that peace comes at the cost of their authenticity. They've learned, often the hard way, that people-pleasing is just another form of self-abandonment. And the more you do it, the more disconnected you become from who you really are. That's why they choose peace, not just external peace, but internal peace, over the fleeting comfort of being liked by everyone. They understand that not everyone will value them, not everyone will understand their strength, their boundaries, or their silence, and they've made peace with that, because they no longer need to be understood to feel secure. They don't perform for acceptance, they don't hustle for validation, they don't need applause to know they're enough. They know their value doesn't decrease just because someone else refuses to see it. That's not arrogance, it's clarity. And clarity is power. They also know that you can't build real peace if you're constantly negotiating your worth. You can't keep bending, shrinking, or softening your truth just to avoid discomfort. At some point, you have to ask yourself, what am I sacrificing in order to be accepted? And if the answer is your integrity, your values, your sanity, then that's too high a price. High-value women refuse to pay that price. They'd rather be misunderstood for being real than accepted for being fake. They'd rather walk alone than stay in spaces that force them to compromise who they are. Toxic people feed on people-pleasers. They exploit that need to be liked, that desire to avoid conflict, that fear of rejection. They know how to twist your kindness into obligation. But high-value women have learned to tell the difference between being kind and being used. They don't let guilt dictate their decisions. They don't confuse self-sacrifice with love. They know that love without respect isn't love, it's control. So they stop over-explaining, they stop apologizing for taking up space, they stop trying to fix people who benefit from staying broken. And when the energy feels off, they don't ignore it, they trust their gut, they trust their nervous system. If something feels wrong, they don't second-guess themselves just because the other person seems fine on the surface. They've trained themselves to listen to that still, small voice that says, "This doesn't sit right." And they honor it even if they can't explain it to anyone else. That's how they protect their peace. Not just by removing toxic people, but by refusing to betray themselves for the sake of appearances. They don't get caught up in proving their worth. They don't argue with people who are committed to misunderstanding them. They don't beg to be seen, heard, or chosen, because they already chose themselves. And from that place of deep self-respect, they operate with calm confidence. They don't need to be loud to be powerful. Their boundaries speak louder than any speech. Their silence cuts deeper than any argument, because it comes from alignment, not avoidance. High-value women understand that walking away doesn't mean failure. It means freedom. It means clarity. It means refusing to water down your essence for people who can't handle it. They don't hold on out of fear. They don't beg for closure. They don't chase apologies that will never come. They release. They let go. Not because they're cold, but because they're done trying to change what someone else doesn't want to fix. Their peace matters more than someone else's comfort. They're not afraid of being alone because solitude doesn't scare them, it grounds them. It gives them room to breathe, to reflect, to reset. They use that space to reconnect with themselves, and from that connection comes strength. They don't need a crowd to feel worthy. They don't need constant reassurance to feel seen. They see themselves clearly, and that's enough. They don't waste time trying to convince toxic people to treat them better. They know that the way someone treats you is a reflection of them, not you, and they refuse to internalize someone else's dysfunction. They don't absorb blame that isn't theirs. They don't carry the emotional weight of someone else's lack of accountability. They release it, fully, quietly, without drama, without announcements. Just action. Just distance. Just peace. They don't make decisions from fear, they make them from strength, from alignment, from a deep understanding that their energy is sacred, their time is limited, and their heart is not a playground for people who haven't learned how to treat it with care. They don't keep explaining their standards, they live them, and the right people rise to meet them, not because they demanded it, but because they modeled it. That's the power of choosing peace over people-pleasing. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop trading your soul for short-term approval. And you start living in alignment with who you are, with what you value, and with the future you're building. Quietly, unapologetically, powerfully.